Good afternoon guys, and welcome back to another video. Today I am out in Devon. I'm down at Ladron Bay. I've been here in a few vlogs. I was here with Digital Camera World when I was shooting for their magazine, and I've also done a vlog here before. I'll link that one just here so you can check it out. But I've come down to Ladron Bay today because this place is perfect for long exposures. I've had a few requests, a couple of DMs on Instagram, and a couple of guys have messaged me on Facebook who are starting out with photography and want to get into doing long exposure photography, and the right ways to do it, or how I go about doing it anyway. Whether it's the right way to necessarily do everything or just my way of doing it. So I thought I'd make a video about how I go about doing my long exposures and what I do and the process I do to get them. So I'm going to do a step-by-step talk through of a shot so you guys can see what I do. So Ladron Bay has these amazing big rock sort of like statues in the middle of the sea, and they look really good by themselves when they're completely isolated. The sea is just really flat. Black and white works really well, and that's the sort of shot I've done before, and that's what I'm going for today. So first things first, the first thing that you'll need along with your camera is a tripod. Make sure that your tripod is nice and sturdy and it won't wobble about in the wind. Luckily today it's not very windy, and I've brought out the carbon fibre Vanguard travel tripod just to show you that you can get super long exposures on a really lightweight tripod. And this is the lightest tripod I've ever picked up in my life. It's meant to be small, it's meant to be carried abroad and on long trips and hikes and stuff. So I'm just going to show you that you can do it with small tripods like this one. So yeah, tip number one, you have to have a tripod. Unless you can balance your camera on a wall or a ledge or something, but then you don't get the maneuverability that you will on a tripod. So you have to have a tripod to be able to do long exposures. Tip number two, shutter release cable. This is vital if you want to do anything over 30 seconds. Most cameras will expose up to 30 seconds, and what I mean by expose is you are opening the shutter and letting everything that's moving in the scene move, and everything that's still, for example this rock, stay still. So all the sea is moving and the camera is capturing that as it does it. It creates that misty effect that we get with landscape photography, and it looks really good at isolating subjects. So you have to have a shutter release to be able to put your camera into bulb mode and to calculate an exposure over 30 seconds. You can do long exposures without a shutter release. Sometimes I've forgotten to put it in my bag and the camera will only shoot up to 30 seconds. In that case I tend to set my camera on a 2 or a 5 second timer, press the shutter button, move back out the way, and let the camera do its thing. So there's no camera movement, there's no movement in the floor, it's not me touching it or anything like that. But it's always better to have a shutter release cable because you can just trigger it without even touching the camera. So there's no camera shake, just guaranteed no camera shake. Tip number three, filters. You have to have ND filters, so neutral density filters, enabling your camera to expose for that amount of time. Because when you open up the shutter, you're letting in loads of light, and you want to slow down that light, enabling you to open that shutter for longer periods of time. So you need what's called a neutral density filter, and they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. They come in screw-on ones, and then you get the square ones, which I have on the front of my lens. Personally, the square ones I think are better, because well, if you have a screw-on one and you set up your focus and you set up your focal length and then you go and screw on a filter, you can move the lens backwards and forwards, you can move your tripod, you can offset the focus, and it's very difficult to get absolute pin sharp images if you're using screw-on filters, but that's just my opinion. So as a landscape photographer, we tend to use square filters. So the Lee filter system has a small little holder that you pop onto the front of your lens, and then you can drop square filters or graduated filters in front of your lens and swap them out at any time, and just move it over to another lens if you have the adapter for that lens as well. It's a lot easier to swap in between shots and change filters. So definitely get yourself some neutral density filters. I have the little stopper and I have the big stopper. The big stopper is 10 stops, the little stopper is 6 stops. And depending on what you're shooting and what time of day you're shooting will determine what filter you're using. So right now it's about half an hour before sunset. It's still very bright, the camera's overexposing, and I've got the big stopper in, so this is a 10 stop filter. And I've set up my exposure, and the first thing you need to do before you even pop the filter in front of your lens is to set up your composition. So once you've set up your composition, you've got the right focal length, I tend to switch my camera into manual focus. That way the camera's not going to search for anything else in the frame. So if you're focusing on, i.e. this big rock thing here, I've focused on this, my camera's in manual focus, it's not going to search for anything else in this gap or behind it, so I know that the camera is focusing pin sharp on this rock. Once you've got your focus and your focal length set up, it's time to set your shutter speed and your ISO and your aperture. So I tend to sit around f11, f10, f13, and the apps that you can use to do long exposures are guided around aperture f11. So set your camera to f11 and put the ISO down to 100 if that's the lowest that your camera goes. Some cameras go a little bit below, but we're just going to put it at 100 for now. And move your shutter speed around to see what looks nice. So we don't want blown out highlights, we don't want dark shadows, we want to have a normal exposed image. So as you can see here, when I twist my shutter speed backwards and forwards, I'm exposing and making sure that there's no blown out highlights and there's no deep dark shadows. Then we can pop the filter in front of our lens. Once the filter is in front of our lens, there's a really good way of calculating your exposure, and Lee Filters have made an app for your iPhone. I think it's on Android as well, so we're going to boot up the Lee Filters app and see what it's telling us to expose for. So, I'm booting up the app, and as you can see, my camera is telling me that it wants to expose for 1/30th of a second, and that will give me a nice even exposure, no blown out highlights, no deep dark shadows. Later on with the dynamic range I can move things around as well if I need to. That's an image where there's no clipped out highlights, no deep dark shadows, and that's a good starting point for us to get the app out. My exposure is at 1/30th of a second on my camera, so when I drop the 10-stop filter in front of my lens I won't be able to see anything, it will be pitch black. So you use the app to calculate how long you should be exposing for. So we can put in 1/30th of a second at 10 stops, and that is giving me an exposure of 30 seconds. So with the app telling me that we should be exposing for 30 seconds, set the camera to bulb mode and expose for 30 seconds. And just set a timer or count in your head to 30, and then once you get to 30, pull the shutter button down and take the shot. And you'll be amazed with the results you can get. As long as you use these steps and do them methodically, one after another, you'll get great long exposure shots. So I've let the sun go down a little bit and it's got a little bit darker, and calculating my shutter speed has now got me up to 1 minute and 40 seconds. And this is a really, really nice long exposure shot. So the sea is going to be milky, wispy, and the sky is going to have a little bit of movement in it. And as long as everything is set up properly and the tripod is nice and sturdy, I'm going to have an absolute pin sharp focus on that rock in the sea there. With 37 seconds to go and it's still counting down, make your way back over to your tripod, grab that shutter release, and when the timer runs out, pull down on that shutter button and you'll have your shot. So yeah, you can get some incredible images doing long exposure, and I do use it quite a lot. It's a technique that landscape photographers use all the time because it just gives that artist impression. It's like, it's how I see that shot. If I want it to be silky long exposures and flat seas and misty whippy clouds, and I can expose for however long you want, as long as you've got the right ND filters. Or if you want it to be nice pin sharp seas, and obviously you have to have a fast shutter speed. So it's all dependent on what you want to do and how you see that shot yourself. But with this image, it looks amazing with that really long exposure of water around this big rock in the middle of the sea. It just isolates it and just makes it look like it's just standing there alone. And as you can see, I did both their colour and black and white, and it looks really, really powerful in black and white. But the sun is set now, it's getting pretty dark. It looks quite bright on here actually, but it's it is getting pretty dark now, so I think it's time to pack up and get home and have some dinner. So I'm all packed up now, I'm just about to walk back to the car. This thing's really cool and is perfect for doing long exposures. So if you're ever down in Devon Way, Ladram Bay, just pop down here. I think parking's free after about 6 o'clock, or definitely in the winter months anyway, but it's definitely worth a shot if you're ever down this way. And just use it, just go out and try it. And as long as you've got pin sharp focus on your subject, and you don't knock your tripod and you're not moving your lens or anything like that, you'll get amazing shots and can change the way you photograph anything. So yeah, I hope this has been of use to some of you guys out there, and you can take away something from it and go and get yourself some filters and get out there and do some long exposure photography. I'm heading back now, gonna get a pizza, have a few beers and chill out and enjoy the rest of the evening. So thank you very much for checking in. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please do consider clicking that subscribe button. Give us a like, write us a little comment about what you think, and I will see you guys in the next one.